Gungrave is a video game series originally developed by Red Entertainment, spanning over 2 decades with multiple installments including VR games and an anime adaptation. The series is known for its distinct cel-shaded visual style, and the main gameplay loop revolving around continuously firing your guns and keeping up the beat counter that increases with every shot you land.
Gungrave.
After quite a long break from traditional releases, the last non-VR Gungrave game, titled Gungrave Overdose, came out in 2004 in Japan and 2005 in North America and Europe. Gungrave has made its triumphant comeback on modern-day hardware with new developers, who are also responsible for the VR titles, and Ikumi Nakamura doing the character design. Yes, that Ikumi Nakamura from E3 2019. Thus, Gungrave G.O.R.E, or Gunslinger of Resurrection, was born. For the rest of the video, I'm going to simply call this game Gungrave G.O.R.E. Over the years, the story of Gungrave has had so many twists and turns with each new part, that at this point it's completely fine to experience gore without playing the previous installments. Besides, the developers kindly give a rundown of the whole story in a small video, which partially helps to understand all the fine details of the glorious script. If only the panels didn't change so rapidly, that would be marvelous. In short, Gungrave is a series about an ex-level 1 crook turned level 100 boss who was murdered and then returned from the dead as a grim, dual pistol-wielding badass with a coffin gun chained to his back. His name is Grave, and he came back with a vengeance. Later on, our protagonist joins an organization aimed to prevent the spread of a drug called Seed that turns people into monsters called Orcmen, enhancing their physical abilities at the cost of their mind and significant body dysmorphia. Grave and his companions head to a place called Scumland to destroy the production facilities and stop Seed from spreading. And that's basically where Gungrave G.O.R.E begins. The game makes sure to explain the basics in the first mission before introducing us to the main story point. Mika, the leader of the organization fighting against the Raven Clan, a criminal syndicate responsible for the production of Seed, gets severely injured, and due to her being exposed to the Seed drug before, has to be put into hibernation, while Grave looks for a cure to stop the mutation process. So we essentially have to do 3 things by the end of the game. Find the cure for Mika, defeat the 4 Raven Clan leaders and figure out who's the mastermind behind the Seed production, and then of course, destroy the drug manufacturing facilities. If you think that I gave away too much of the plot, Don't worry, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Gungrave G.O.R.E is one of those cases when the main point of focus is the action on the screen and the overall presentation. Everything else is secondary. Which is why the best way to experience Gungrave G.O.R.E, in my opinion, is to treat it like an arcade game that has a story, but you can play it at home. This makes more sense than you could imagine.
私の腕には異常が生じたの。まあ悪いことばかりじゃないけどね。ボスとあの暗い男グレイブは今スカムランドに向かってるの。もうすぐ連絡が来ると思うわ。その時まで私も本部で様子を見とかないといつ私が必要になるかわからないからね。
Think about it. Arcade games mainly focus on getting the highest score and earning the best rating for each completed stage. In Gungrave G.O.R.E, just like in the previous installments, the gameplay is centered around dispatching waves of enemies, keeping up the beat counter that shows the number of successful consecutive shots, and getting a higher art score by pulling off special moves and executing your enemies. After each level, you get a summary ranking the time it took you to complete the stage, how many enemies were killed, how much health you have left, the maximum beat value that you got on this level, and the art score earned. So, the game incentivizes you to keep moving forward, disposing of your enemies, and keeping up that beat counter rolling in order to get more points at the end of the chapter, which can then be used to buy upgrades and new skills for Grave. In my opinion, this approach can be a double-edged sword, as it does make the game more competitive by always forcing the player to aim for the highest score, and the flow of beating one wave of goons after another is surprisingly addictive. However, this does make the rest of the game feel somewhat irrelevant, as it would happen with most arcade titles. There's a reason why high score-oriented games usually have a plot that could fit on two sides of a notepaper. Everyone knows that most people won't care about the characters and are here just to rack up some points. Surprisingly enough, with Gungrave G.O.R.E, the developers somehow managed to maintain the balance, delivering a game with a simple yet addictive gameplay and a somewhat coherent story that has a predictable, satisfying ending. You'll spend most of the game blasting your way through a number of locations based in different Asian countries, taking care of enemies ranging from basic guys equipped with baseball bats to mutants like the aforementioned Orc-Man, with occasional boss fights. Your main attack is using the auto-aim guns that can be fired in full auto or single shot mode, that will make your trigger fingers sore after a long play session. Then we have our melee attacks, when Grave swings his coffin around, turning the oncoming enemies into mush, and executions that can be performed on stunned enemies to refill the shield. Of course, the main party piece are the glorious demolition strikes that can be used once you fill up the special meter and accumulate enough demolition points that are used to unleash these special moves, as well as the Fury mode that increases your damage output for a short period of time. As I've mentioned before, the main gameplay loop is very simple, as you don't get that many moves to play with, and the main difference between most enemies is how many shots it takes to kill them. But it's this adrenaline rush of doing your best to keep up that beat and gain as many art points as possible is what makes Gungrave G.O.R.E so addictive. The game can get a bit too monotonous and repetitive, which is why it's probably best to take a break from time to time so that you don't feel fatigued. Thankfully, Gungrave G.O.R.E doesn't overstay its welcome and will take around 8 to 10 hours on the first playthrough. The art style retains most of the aspects that made the original installment so great. I like the character designs of the allies and the multiple bosses provided by the brilliant Ikumi Nakamura, as well as some levels like Hong Kong with many bright neon lights. The optional cel-shaded filter is a nice addition, giving the option to have a more authentic Gungrave experience. But honestly, for the most part, I didn't see that big of a difference between the filter being on and off. Maybe it's my poor eyesight, I don't really know. Have a look for yourself and let me know in the comments what you think. Sound-wise, Gungrave G.O.R.E is simply overwhelming due to the constant gunshots coupled with the sounds of dying enemies and broken environment pieces, like chairs, lamps, tables, etc. One would think that there is no chance for any music to be heard in this cacophony. However, not only does the soundtrack mix well with the overall ruckus, but makes sure that its presence is felt, keeping the entire audio section of the game tight and exciting. I have to give credit not only to the composers, but also to the sound engineers for doing a great job. Now, Gungrave G.O.R.E is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, starting with an underwhelming story that at times feels like an afterthought, all the way to the graphics that definitely won't be everyone's cup of tea, especially considering that this game makes you choose between 4K 60 frames per second and 4K 30 frames per second with additional eye candy on consoles. Art style reigns supreme over graphics in my opinion, but even I would agree that this game has no business making the player choose between performance and fidelity, as there is nothing really to warrant this sacrifice. And of course I have to once again talk about the gameplay loop, and how the level design hinders the original vision of this game. Gungrave G.O.R.E is a pretty easy game, and I can't imagine many people having issues with most of the enemies. The only real challenge will be the first boss that you have to face, and even that is mostly due to a lack of abilities to play with, and not mastering the controls. The rest is pretty straightforward, and can be completed from the first try with practically the same strategy. Just shoot your way through, and use the special moves from time to time. The saving grace would be the beat meter and the art score that I've mentioned earlier, but some of the levels are designed in a way that it can be really hard and frustrating to keep that meter going. And at a point I realized that nothing else mattered in the game for me, apart from that damned beat counter. At times I found myself walking into a room and looking for furniture that I could shoot to rack up the beat score before taking care of the enemies. I mean, you gotta have your priorities straight, right? Also, it would be nice to add an online leaderboard so that people could compete with each other, adding more incentive to complete each level. Getting the highest ranking and points for buying upgrades is cool, but competing with others to reach the first place on the leaderboard for bragging rights is even better. And not only would this increase the replay value, but possibly attract newcomers to the series. Gungrave G.O.R.E feels like a PlayStation 2 title with upgraded graphics that got released in 2022 for modern hardware. And, believe it or not, it's not a bad thing by any means. Sure, this game is no masterpiece and can get repetitive, as there isn't much to do aside from shooting until your finger hurts, with occasional cutscenes that try to tell a predictable story. But it's that great flow you get into when nothing else matters but increasing the number on the combo counter, and the never-ending spray of bullets accompanied by a dynamic soundtrack that makes you feel like you're having an arcade experience of your life from the comfort of your living room that makes Gungrave G.O.R.E so enjoyable. Sometimes, it's great to go back to a simpler time when we were all younger and our minds were not overflooded with ideas on what a good game should be. A time when we played games just because they were fun. And something about Gungrave G.O.R.E and its archaic approach to game design reminds me of those simple times. Some things are charming for staying the same, even though it's been 20 years and we're no longer impressionable kids. And I applaud the developers for staying true to the original Gungrave formula, instead of turning it into another run-of-the-mill third-person shooter. Have you ever heard of the Gungrave games? Or perhaps you've seen the anime? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoy my content, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. Thank you for watching and have a pleasant day.